how would you resolve the land issue? Because
First,
understand, let's talk Eastern Cape, for example, which you know well.
Yeah. So
it's a messy situation.
100%. So what I would do is that I would, one, expedite, and these things don't have to all go in stages. They can go at the same time, concurrently. So the more radical policies that are coming out of MK are those that died at the conference floors for many years in elective conferences in the ANC.
Welcome to the State of the Nation. I'm your host, Mike Sham, and we are here in the aftermath of the 2024 South African general election. And here we get going with a lot of our analysis of what's gone on, as well as the South African condition. And it's always great to hear from new voices, people that we haven't had on the show before. And I'm very, very happy to say that joining me today is somebody I appeared on the Podcast and Chill platform with, and that is Zimasa Vibaza.
How are you, Mike?
Good. And for those of you that haven't seen this guy on YouTube, I'm sure there's not many because he has been all over the show, go and look up Mustafa. First, explain where the Mustafa comes from.
So it's literally just it's an evolution of a high school nickname that went from Coos to Mush Mash, and then when we started to brand ourselves with mates, they were like, well, you need one word that just like has a thing. And Mustafa is the chosen one in Arabic. So it was perfect because my Zimasa means to bless with presence. And that kind of made sense to me. It's like one who blesses with presence. The chosen one.
Well, I happen to know that because I'm Lebanese. and
Brilliant.
I knew the Arabic, but it's great to have you on the State of the Nation.
It's great to be here.
And I've been a follower of yours where you've been on a lot of shows. And let's get straight into your opinion of the general election. Was it a bit of a surprise? Let's first talk about the election itself. Did it tie in with what you thought beforehand?
I think, like many people, we underestimated how far MK would go. But what we did not underestimate was that they would bleed the ANC in KZN. So we got one thing right, but we got the other one completely wrong. We underestimated the inroads that they would make into Zulu-speaking areas across the country, but specifically across three provinces, KZN, Gauteng, and Mpumalanga. Because they've gone and 10% of Gauteng is, no one had that on their bingo card. The fact that they pushed so far into Mpumalanga, nobody had that. We thought it would be contained, it would maybe go into certain areas, etc., but it wouldn't be as widespread. But then we've got to ask ourselves why. We've got to say to ourselves, why is it that is it purely tribal? I think that the easy answer is that. I think a lot of people will be like, we think it's tribal. But a lot of people came out and said, look, I am ANC, but I voted MK. So the other side of it is to understand that the ANC still exists in MK heavily.
Do you think, and before we go on,
yeah,
we're sponsored by Pace Car Rental. So if you need to rent a car, go to Pace Car Rental.
Shout
and
out.
You can get a Sona discount. Just type in the code SONA, S-O-N-A. And if we look a little bit different, because we're forming our own coalition of the Puffer Jacket.
The Puffer Jacket Coalition.
Puffer Jacket Coalition. Young, upwardly mobile black guy, very old white guy. This is a coalition made in heaven.
Love it.
Okay, so everybody there's still the strain of the ANC within MK.
Yeah.
And it still gets reiterated all the time by Jacob Zuma himself. Yeah. I mean, in your opinion, and because it can only be an opinion, so are you suggesting that a lot of non-Zulus voted for Jacob Zuma?
Yes. They voted for Jacob Zuma because the radical policies, the more radical policies, the ANC is very centrist. So the more radical policies that are coming out of MK are those that died at the conference floors for many years in elective conferences in the ANC, or at consultative conferences or at policy conferences. They died on the floor, but they existed in people's hearts. So there was a faction of people who still wanted those policies to exist in reality, not just to be argued on the floor at ANC sort of policy conferences and get killed. So that faction existed. It didn't just go away. Just like maybe more right-wing policies are not necessarily all-encompassing in certain political parties, you do find that they exist as an element of it. So the element of the more radical economic transformation factions within the ANC said, finally, okay, the conditions were perfect for them to pull away and say these things must live on their own and they need to be popularized throughout South Africa, and more people need to know about these, and then we'll figure out if people want them or not.
But how do you marry this with the fact that when Jacob Zuma was president, had a great parliamentary majority, president for 9 years, he was the least radical of the presidents that we've had in this country. He was the least, by far, radical. You know, Thabo Mbeki was there and saw the sort of first couple of stages of BEE.
Yeah.
He was quite radical in
Askisak, those policies.
Exactly. He did a lot of stuff.
RDP was under him actually, because he was administrative and Mandela was more statesman. Yeah.
So he really did at least make the first steps towards radical economic transformation. Cyril Ramaphosa has died on the hill of economic transformation.
Yeah.
Right? Jacob Zuma, for 9 years, did virtually nothing until he was about to get kicked out. That was the first time he showed any inclination towards radical economic transformation. Yeah, this lie that he was a radical economic transformer certainly wasn't apparent when he was president. He did nothing.
So you've got to understand that, and we had this conversation at Podcast and Chill. Representation is very key. The Zulu nation is very key to South Africa. I fall under the Xhosa nation, but I understand the relevance and importance of the Zulu nation. They're a large block. Their voice in recent times has been diminished after Jacob Zuma was pushed out. So what that meant is that you had a block of people who have significance, whether it's in votes, whether it's in discourse. They run the taxi industry across South Africa. So when they felt that their power, their actual influence and power was waning, they ultimately became a lot more radicalized themselves to say, we're losing out on this thing. We're the most here, and we're not seeing anything. Now, when it comes to Jacob Zuma not necessarily doing anything, I'll give you a very simple sort of like example. I don't necessarily believe that what Jacob Zuma was meant to do and what he did were too far off. Now, this is going to be a little bit crazy because I think that the representation was more important than throughput of policies. I think the representation for Zulu people was important.
Just to have him there.
Have the guy there. Because there were many sort of allegations, and some you could say they were founded in something that said that the ANC had become a Xhosa party.
Yeah.
So there's also those conversations that when 2009 came around, a lot of Xhosa people moved to the sides or to the peripheries,
or
right?
Cope.
Or to cope. Yeah. So representation was important. The funny thing is that when we get to the 2017 conference, as well as the last conference, 22 conference, you find that in those two conferences, KZN, although they came with a different sort of energy, right? Very aggressive energy at ANC conferences. There was a need to say, okay, you've lost, but we'll give you something. Because it's important that people feel some sort of representation. They started to lose a lot of that. By the 22 conference, they'd lost everything. They got 0 out of 7. So suddenly now you've got this massive block who feels disenfranchised, who have nothing within this party. The recipe was literally there. So you find that it's of the ANC's making that they find themselves here. Because, again, because the ANC in itself is very centrist, they could control dissenting voices, more radical voices inside the party. Now these policies are out there in a big way. And whether you think it's good or whether you think it's bad, the policies will live in the hearts and minds of people, and people will now choose for themselves. Because many will say, yes, the black vote has been fractured, but I say that the ANC, the MK, and the EFF are still the ANC.
Okay, on that point, I don't know if I agree with you.
That's fine.
Right? And on this show, as many people
Perfect.
that watch The State of the Nation will know, I disagree with a lot of
Perfect.
people. And that's what I see fracturing is the broad church, right? I don't think that those parties, I don't think you could put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I don't think that, that Julius Malema goes to bed every night hoping that the EFF can become part of the ANC again and he can serve as deputy to somebody else, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that those MK people, right, other than, Jacob Zuma says he wants to take them back to the ANC, but I think this is a bit like you start your own business. We used to work together. You go off on your own. And, a year later, I come to you and say, okay, let's get back together again. I don't think that happens. You know what I mean? Because there's just too many cases of parties slipping out. I mean, I don't see Herman Mashaba going back to the DA, for example. I'm saying once you leave, you leave. Why in South Africa do we think that this is a natural home? I don't understand the logic. Everywhere that I've seen somebody break away, I've never seen those leaders pining to go back to be the deputy to somebody else. You get your own shop.
100%.
You're the boss.
100%. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I believe that what we have here is a case of the policies that have broadly been understood within that previous business, and how our way of work may not have been something that you've liked, but you've understood that they're in need and importance, because a lot of these come from the Freedom Charter. The basis is we have the Freedom Charter and it binds us to a certain extent. You find that one of the things that is important is that the radical element is questioning something that a lot of black people are starting to question, but have never had an open conversation or a platform open enough to have a conversation around the Constitution. Now, you find that a certain sect, the white sect of South Africa, lords the Constitution over black people.
And that really angers black people, doesn't it?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
If it is a living document, we should go back to it and say, let's put it to a vote again. If it is this grand document that guides us and has all of these amazing things, let's put it to a referendum. Let's have that conversation. So by not having that conversation, you are allowing a more radical element to shape the conversation around this issue.
Although that space to question the document exists, right? It exists every day of our lives, and we do make changes to it. This is the thing that I'm a little bit confused by.
Sure.
Is that every time Parliament sits, right, they're making changes to the laws of the country. They can do. That's what their job is to do. So, when people sort of dislike the Constitution, what I'm hearing about it is that we just don't like adhering to the Constitution. And invariably, the people that don't like the Constitution, I haven't met anybody that doesn't have the stench of some kind of malfeasance next to their name.
So you could say that. You could actually say to yourself, that's the reason why people question it. I tend to have a different take on it. The Constitution in itself has economically limited a lot of people, or it's taken the fall for a lot of it. But what the protectors of the Constitution don't want to have is a conversation of saying, let's revisit the document. If the document is so good and it makes sense and it's doing well, let's revisit the document as a South Africa, because I don't know who or what and how the people who made that document, how they were feeling, what they were thinking long term. We've now had an opportunity to say the first version of it right? And it's maybe small iterations have lasted 30 years. Maybe we should have another sit down as a country and say that constitution that many feel is a copy and paste, by the way, that let's have a sit down and see if all the sections still make sense to us. Maybe it's not the whole thing. Maybe it's key sections that we need to have a tougher conversation about. And if we don't have that, if we don't open it properly, we're going to have that people are going to break away and radicalize the whole document and say the whole thing sucks.
Right.
And if we don't open it now, we're going to regret it later when we do find ourselves that the society is now more radical and they're not willing to have that conversation anymore.
Yeah, although I don't think it's a problem for the country for people to get more radical. Maybe we're allowed our views, whatever they are. Certainly what informs me is I lived in a country that had a parliamentary democracy. Oh my God, right, is all I can say. Is if you've ever seen a system that can open itself to abuse, please have a parliamentary democracy. How do you think the National Party managed to do some of the things they did, right? They had a simple parliamentary majority. They could introduce legislation, as we know, right? Most of the apartheid legislation was introduced bit by bit under a parliamentary democracy. We think we should have a mixed marriages law. Let's vote on it. Okay, turns out we've got 58%, thank you, the motion's carried, right? And there was no Bill of Rights. There was no constitution. So in other words, everybody was powerless to stop this parliamentary majority from doing anything they liked, right? So, I've lived under a situation where we didn't have this constitution and we didn't have that read together with the Bill of Rights. And believe me, this sort of falls into a similar category as expropriation, as the property rights argument, right? When you take that away in the understanding it's going to happen to somebody else, be very careful. That Rottweiler can bite you too, right? Take away these checks and balances that the Constitution gives, and you don't want to be there, right? That's all I can say from bitter experience, right? In this country where it was almost impossible to solve any of the problems in the old South Africa unless you did it extrajudiciously, right? In other words, take up arms, because you can't get it through Parliament. You couldn't get a judge to say, be reasonable. You know what I mean? I'm saying there was no recourse. So the Constitution is there. There are mechanisms to change it. And the question that I want to put to you is, what are these glaring problems with the Constitution that needs to be revisited?
The first one is land.
Right.
And we should have the conversation around land. And what normally happens with people is that they add an academic element to this thing, and you want people who feel emotive to land, who in their core and in their soul understand that land links them to their forefathers. It's generations and generations. So dispossession was never fixed. And the conversation that a lot of people are having is outside of those who own the land. Now, the willingness to have the conversation around land and mining in South Africa
is it land or mining? Or both?
And mining. Linked, heavily linked. We're not having those conversations. It's the tougher conversations because they're a source of economic opportunity for those that have it, and it is a gap and a bridge too far for those that don't have it. Now, the question that we must have is, do people want land to economically make it active? Do they want it so that they can just look at it? These are all important conversations that we need to have. But we need to have a conversation around land in this country. And land in itself is heavily tied to the Constitution and some of the give and takes that a lot of people felt that they were not part of in 1993 to 96. that they now say, but 30 years on, I'm missing something. But the conversation is to say, do we then say to ourselves, those people are becoming radical, it doesn't make sense? Or do we say to them, let's have the conversation and let's prove to them that this way still is better?
Okay, but the conversation is constantly being had. So I can't quite understand the argument that says, let's have the conversation. I mean, just last year there was a vote on land. Right?
How did that vote go?
It didn't pass.
Why do you think it didn't pass?
Well, it didn't pass because the majority of Parliament said, we're happy with the way it is.
Because people vote on party lines, and the people who truly wanted to have a
now
more
we
radical
get into the situation of what happens
party lines.
What should happen in a country, right?
Wait. Let me finish the thought. They vote on party lines, and for the longest time, the ANC, who are more centrist, have had the say and have had total control over their MPs.
Okay.
Now that you have a fractured constituency that is still, maybe you could say, broad church ANC, yes, or started from there, from inception, you now have people that can vote for a particular more radical feel.
Okay. So let's say there is this radical vote and it goes back to Parliament. It should be the first issue on the agenda. And it fails 65-35, because that's roughly how it will fail. Right? What happens then?
Do you
Has
think
a conversation been had?
Do you think the ANC as it stands now will still continue on the same path?
You see, I'm
asking you if you think it'll.
I'll tell you, I've got a ready answer for that.
Cool.
My ready answer for that is in human nature. Okay. I think that it's a very simple thing. You and I can talk. We can sort of out radical each other, for example, in discussion. Very, very different when you are running the country and you know the implication of what may be in those radical minds. It's
easier to be in opposition.
Right? So it's very easy in opposition. It's very easy, for example, I'll give you a good example, similar kind of thing. It's very easy to say, let's bring back the death penalty. It's a snappy election thing to say, let's just say, right?
I think we should,
right? But let's just say, we say, let's bring back the death penalty. Cool. Right? It sounds great on an election poster, all good. Now, there's two parts further to that. Because now you get elected. Now you say, okay, fine. Let's vote on it in Parliament. Who wants to bring back the death penalty? Let's just say the thing passes.
Maybe like a 52.
52, let's just say, right? People say, good idea. We hang them. Now there's the implementation of that, which gets far more difficult. So I'm saying, sometimes these things, when you go down to the next step, to the next step, to the next step, become this egg becomes really difficult to unscramble. Okay? You know what I mean? I'm just saying that.
No, I kind of follow. I follow where you're going, and let's say maybe the death penalty.
Yes.
The death penalty needs to exist for the most heinous crimes. South Africa has set a very high bar of getting over and getting onto the death penalty because of where it comes from, because there is an inherent association with the death penalty with the old regime.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you can't say sorry afterwards.
No, that's fine. What we need to do and have is that once this constitutional barrier of life was created, we did not make room for the people that don't deserve to live for the things that they've clearly done. That, yes, as a society, we want to rehabilitate people. But a life without capital consequence creates a freedom where people know the worst that could happen to me for doing something egregious and heinous is still that I will be sent to prison and I will go live my life there. That's the worst that could happen.
Yes.
So what we are saying is that the possibility of there being a gate through the wall that we've created is still there. And we can clearly define who gets to walk through that gate and loses their life for what they've done. If you kill 5 people, what are we going to rehabilitate in there? But yes, so anyways, the death penalty, that's how I feel.
I get that. And then the counter argument is, please, not in my name, kill other people, because You got to be. I want to be 1,000% sure that you did kill those people, that they weren't extenuating. So,
and we can prove that.
And then what will end up happening, because we know we lived through it before, right? Rich people will find the loopholes, their lawyers will, and poor people get hung. That's all that I can see, because that's roughly what happened.
The poor people are already hanging people. They're already burning people. They're already taking justice in their own hands.
We do understand that, but we are talking about it more as a constitutional
point,
right?
Sure.
An illustration one, and it's very emotive. We can then go down the point of countries with capital punishment hasn't necessarily seen a diminishing in the murder rate, but that's a different sort of discussion. Let's park that one as a separate one. But now, let's just say we take the land debate to Parliament, which I think we should, until such time as people feel that this is we can't raise this anymore because it's not gaining any traction. But let's just say it gets defeated in Parliament again. Because you see, yes, we wanted to pick up, you said, do I believe that the ANC would vote differently on land now that they got 40%? And I'm saying that when you're in Parliament, when you're in power, not Parliament, when you're in power, you get a crash course in the way a country works. Right? And that's where I point the finger back at Jacob Zuma. He becomes president. Clearly he had views in his mind as to how our country is run. Right? He's made it clear subsequently how he felt the country should have. But while he was president, a lot of realities become very stark when you're in power. In other words, you will lose all of your investment. Your currency will tank. Your inflation will go through
all the things that Magda tweeted.
All the things that she didn't invent them, right? We can give you a laundry list of countries that have tried these things and the repercussion of that. So I'm saying that as long, and I'll take this bet happily, that you put those radicals in power, they will suddenly change, much like we've seen with Julius Malema recently in the build-up to the election, where he suddenly started campaigning in a suit. Suddenly starts saying, no, we won't nationalize the banks, we'll start a national bank, which is not what he said for the longest of time. Because what I'm saying is, once you get close to that power, you say, oh hell, my policies, if I do this, will mean that this economy tanks, that the country tanks.
Mike, we have a landless people who.
But whose fault is that?
Hold on. We have a landless people.
Yeah, I disagree with that.
We have a landless people who don't have an affinity to the country because they don't own much. We need to ensure that these people start to feel some sort of franchising to the country. Wait. If we do not do that, we are going to find that the conditions for proper uprising become more and more possible. Even the black tender guys and the bourgeoisies that exist are exacerbating this. A lot more people are starting to see that this doesn't make sense. Now, the best way I see is to get ahead of this and to say, relative to the land conversation that people are having, what are the possible solutions? Because it seems that those that want to defend the current state of things say there's nothing wrong with what and how we are seeing things. But the conversations that are happening in South Africa at a social level, at a racial level, at a demographic level, at a class level, are different around the land thing. Now the question then becomes, do we feel that when 58% of the people turn out to vote, that the legitimacy of those who even take power going forward will be seen when 42% of people said, I'm staying out of this?
Okay. Now, I could not agree with you more, right? And this is where our Puffer Jacket Coalition is going to...
The Puffer Jacket Coalition.
Right? Is that what you said on land is as true as, and I buy that with my heart and my soul, okay? And that is that not enough has been done, right? Because I believe we're having the wrong discussion, right? It's similar to the argument around NHI, where do we want healthcare for every South African? Damn right we do. We want quality healthcare for every South African. The question is NHI the best vehicle? And I think absolutely not. What is the best vehicle? Is a great government-run health service that's efficient and growing, which we've got. The first part, we've got a government health service, but it's being mismanaged, it's corrupt, it doesn't work, and it's not growing. So it's not serving the people, right? The solution isn't, in my opinion, to go outside of that to find another solution, because otherwise we're just going to end up in the same problem, right? So with land, I could not agree with you more. What we want is more South Africans with skin in the game. Nothing gives you skin in the game like owning your own house, right? Mm-hmm. Let us drive towards that. Why, for example, has the government not given title deeds to anybody that owns a house that has been provided to them? Why not? You know, let's get that going. Let's get land ownership going. There are mechanisms within our current legislative framework to do that expeditiously, because the land exists, the need exists, and it's in the best interest of the country to do that. So there we're agreeing 100%. Unfortunately, a lot of people will always pick me out saying, oh, you're just trying to protect white privilege when we talk about land. No, I'm just saying that if the solution to the problem isn't to take away property rights, the solution is to deal with the land ownership issue, which is skewed. I'm saying these are two different arguments, two totally different arguments. The one I dismiss, because if you don't have property rights, what am I going to strive for? How do I build wealth? How will the country ever improve on what it's got? So, for example, if we have got, as for example, the ANC, the EFF and MK suggest, that the government owns all the property, and you and I own farms from this program. We've gone to that office in Pretoria, and fairly gives us a farm. What kind of barn are you going to build on a farm that you don't own? How well are you going to tend that land compared to if you own that land? You know, that's really what I'm saying, is that let's have the correct arguments. Much like I think NHI is a red herring, because the solution is, to me, it's to deflect the mistake that the government has made in providing government health care. And I believe that the same thing with land. It's an absolutely legitimate question. Why does the Zulu King own all that land? Let's give the land to the people who can work that land. Let them get title deeds, let them have tenure, let them be able to build wealth, create an economy that it will be multiples bigger than the economy we've got now.
So I want to understand something. Is there a fundamental issue with the Zulu King being a custodian of the Ingonyama Trust to you, relative to the land question?
Yeah, look, I'm going to start off by making an admission. I am a fiercely anti-royalist in any context ever. I did spend a couple of years living in England. Oh my Lord, you know, even there where you've just got a monarchy that sits there quietly. Why do you need this? Why do I need somebody who, by dint of his birth, has got some kind of come on. You know, this is the modern era. This is a joke. This is Game of Thrones stuff that you can have a king. So, you know, see that from the point of view of my own worldview, where you mention king and I want to vomit, okay? So I'm very bad when it comes to royal families. But what I'm saying is communal land was a great idea 500 years ago. But this, you would know, when you look at a graph of human development,
yeah,
it's an exponential curve from the moment that land ownership became a thing, right? And why does Africa and why do South Africans think that we're exempt from following exactly the same curve, right? If we had beneficial property ownership, we too would have an economy that grows like China. Even in China, you're allowed land ownership, right? But yeah, we want to take it away. It's crazy.
But Mike, people have a question around how a lot of that land was acquired. And when that conversation becomes more broad, you then find that black people are asking themselves, so if this land was taken at the barrel of a gun, right? But we're now in an interconnected global system or whatever everybody's saying, and we're being, this thing is hanging over us that says food security when we're mostly all hungry. There's a conversation to be had around the part that says nothing was ever given to people for their dispossessions, and that was a law. But we stopped the game and we said, we need to play a different game. Don't worry that you're 3-0 down. We'll carry that over into the new game. You'll still be 3-0 down, but now things will be fair. There was an unfairness that was never actually fixed that exists in black people and will continue to exist in black people until there is a conversation around the fact that black people in South Africa feel disenfranchised because I can trace my family 7 generations back, right? And I know that at some point, somewhere down the line, there was dispossession. I know that in my family. So when we say, but you can't go back and take that land because now a person has a piece of paper that says 1, 2, 3, 4. That piece of paper says this person now owns this land, but I know how that person got the land. So if we're not going to deal with that conversation, that part of the land conversation, we lose the emotion and anger that people have towards land. So I'm dispossessed, I'm forced into internment camps, right? Just like the Afrikaners. I then find myself in a position where they say, all that stuff that you went through, let's park it. Let's have some Ubuntu. But let's now continue with this new system where what the government owns will be divvied up based off claims and what, etc., and all of these type of things, but leave the other stuff. We are not having the conversation around land in the right context, in the right emotional context for the people who were dispossessed and the groupings of clans, families, and tribes that were moved off their land. Yes, life has moved on, but we need to find a way to appease these people, at least to say we have remedied what we could relative to what we've done. Yeah. And the expectation that the state must do it, Mike, is what is infuriating people, because the state represents the collectiveness of all of us, but collectively people took guns and they forced people away. And that was a different government, right? But the humans who benefited from that system still have pieces of paper that says that they own from here to that mountain. Now, and that in itself is the conversation, is the more radical part of the conversation, because people are not stupid. Okay. They do want prosperity. But what they are saying is that we do not have the levers to gain even an entry into particular parts of the sectors of this economy.
Yeah. Now, once again, we're exactly on the same page. But all I'm hearing out of that, all I'm thinking while you're saying that, is state inefficiency, right? Because, we're saying, referee, intervene. Yeah, I've got a piece of paper, and we know that the mechanisms were put in place to remedy exactly that. But our government has chosen not to remedy that. I don't think the fault lies at the door of the legislation. The government was given the means to remedy it. So remedy it. You could make the statement that, how far back do you go? All land is stolen.
Willing buyer, willing seller doesn't work.
No, well, how far back do we go? When do you start? All I know is that the government has failed to act, but it's not a fault of the legislation that the government didn't do their work. Do you know what I mean? It's a fault of the government, and they've been punished at the polls for it. Quite rightly, but too late if you ask me. Right? But I'm not 100% sure. You also get into this crazy situation where you say, because my surname is such and such, I was born in Johannesburg and I've never been to the Eastern Cape, but look at my surname. I'm sure I own a farm done just outside PE. Do you know what I mean? You start getting into ridiculous arguments here. And any country has to deal with that. Any country has to deal with one form of land dispossession or another. Right? And in most countries, you kind of have a situation which is very unpalatable, especially in the South African context, where somebody makes a pragmatic decision of saying, listen, let's just get on with running the country with the game we've got here. I think what we've had is this half open, half closed situation.
Which is why people reject the let's get on with the business of running the country.
Yeah.
Because there are differences in people's situations when we say let's continue running the country, and a lot of people, majority of people, the reason why black people in this country do not feel that the country truly represents them is because when they go home, they have nothing. And this is not to say that they want to be multi-billionaires. This is to say that the prospect of a future is heavily diminished because they don't own anything. Now, ownership can take different and multiple forms. But what is happening is that when you say, well, it shouldn't matter, when that pragmatic government that you speak of says, it actually shouldn't matter what happened in the past, we'll try figure out what we can, and then we'll move on. It's, in theory, a great way to move forward. In speak, it makes sense. In reality, you find that
you're going to keep that anger.
Because people are going to move away and say, well, there's X amount of us that are dependent on whatever the state can give us. And a lot of people want to be productive on their own because they come from that feeling of, I have a little piece of thing and I'm going to do my own thing. But remember, again, people were moved out of a place that they existed in, moved into another place. Then that maybe you can't remedy it in a simple sense.
Okay. Can we move this forward?
Sure.
I want to move this forward like this. So this is the one question that maybe you can help me answer. Let's just say we made, in a compromise coalition, you become the president tomorrow with far-reaching powers. You can do whatever you like. Okay?
Sure.
We're just hypothesizing now. The puffer jackets have been...
So much power.
We've got so much of power. We can do whatever we like. How would you resolve the land issue? Because
first,
understand, let's talk Eastern Cape, for example, which you know well.
Yeah. So
it's a messy situation.
100%. So what I would do is that I would, one, expedite, and these things don't have to all go in stages. They can go at the same time, concurrently. I would expedite giving people access to government land that is agricultural and possibly arable as a start, right? I would...
shouldn't you start with property rights?
No.
Where are you going to suspend them,
we're
take them away?
We're going to start with the land that is being unused.
Available
and unused.
Okay, perfect.
Let's start there. Then what we're going to do is that we're going to take the government land, the land that's unused, and start to distribute that amongst people. We're going to create mechanisms, better mechanisms. We're going to put better people in financing those things. So land for land doesn't make sense. That's the next conversation we need to have. And maybe we're not getting to it because people we're still on this one, right?
On first point.
We've then got to create mechanisms for financing
But
so that people...
So far you got the easy part.
Yeah, the easy part. That easy part suddenly, and you can fact check me on the numbers. Maybe moves us from 20% ownership to maybe close to 50.
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
Then we've got to have the conversation around agricultural land that's not being used specifically.
So in other words, I've got a 50, I don't even know what 50 hectares means.
50,000.
50,000, I don't know what a hectare is.
It's a soccer field. It's a rugby field. It's one rugby field.
Okay, I've got 50,000 hectares and I farm on 10. You're saying, give me the government's going to step in on the other 40.
What we're saying is we've got to find a way to say, relative to this, what are you economically using?
Right, okay.
What are you using?
Okay.
Right.
And then you're going to say the part you're not using, we're going to do something with it.
The part you're not using, we need to then have a conversation to say, us as the people.
Yes.
Does it make sense for us to take it?
Right.
Can we make it productive with the systems we've put in place, the funding mechanisms, the agricultural colleges, the training, etc.? And do the people in the area want to even be involved in the thing?
Okay.
when we start to have those conversations
Yes.
around a piece of land, we
Right.
can then say to ourselves, okay, perfect.
Yes.
The people in this area want it. We have the mechanisms that we can use it. Let's try it and let's give them, like
Yes.
a commercial entity, let's give them 10 years.
Okay.
If in 10 years they haven't hit these targets, we can then move on and to say, look, and by the way, right, relative to either there being a claim on the land or any other sort of blockage, which must also be sorted, we then have a case of saying, we're not going to dispossess the economic value that you've created on this land, because that's important, because we don't want to move backwards, but we have to have the land conversation. So we don't want to move you backwards. But what we will do, maybe through tax breaks, maybe through some sort of incentive, we're going to say, okay, you were only using maybe 10,000 of this 50,000. The land now is going to be used by the community for communal farming. We're going to give them inputs, we're going to give them etc., and they're going to use the land. What they get out of it, they will obviously, either there'll be off-takes or whatever.
Right.
You're going to find that there will be remuneration out of this because you know the area, you're also an entrepreneur, you've worked in the area. So if you help these people, there'll be other tax breaks for you, right? So we've got to find a way to say, the land that is unused and is laying fallow, how do we inject it? Because also commercial farmers don't have enough money to work all of their lands generally. Okay. So we're now at that point. My biggest issue then becomes, how do we deal with property rights?
Right.
And I don't necessarily believe that property rights need to be, I'd say, upheaved or thrown away, because we've shown that possession of things allows you to build off for the next generation. Yes. So that's why the land conversation is there, because people understand that if I own it this generation, I give the next generation another chance. And because I don't have anything of tangible value in this world, my next generation is also a bit screwed.
Yeah.
So then that conversation, that national conversation, a lot of the conversation around land actually is not so much around where people stay. It's more around agricultural land and the land to produce.
Okay.
So we've got to say to people, we'll start with the agricultural land and the prospects of growing our agricultural base through these things, and then say property rights. We need to have a different discussion, because by the time we as Puffer Jacket Coalition are in, so many Black South Africans actually own property, not land. Property.
Yes.
So that's how I would start.
Okay, so that's why our coalition is intact. Because I can't disagree with anything you said there. Right? I'm in full agreement with you. Right? And I don't see any impediment to doing that tomorrow, other than the fact that you and I didn't get a majority vote.
We didn't. But you know why do you know why MK and the EFF suddenly have a voice? Because the middle of the road ANC types who have been for the longest time sitting on these type of executions and all of these things, because yes, the policies were always there to do a lot of these things. They needed to have a more radical people to say this thing must be done. It probably will still be done relative to the frameworks that we have, but they're also just not getting off their ass and doing something.
And the guy who was probably best placed to do anything about it was a guy who was president for 9 years. Like, while you're the president, put a rocket under somebody and say, let's get this done. You know what I mean? So what I see as the most divisive debates that we've got in our country are really as a result of inaction of a bad government over the last 30 years, not the Constitution as a problem. You know, like I said to Gayton McKenzie when he was on the show, and he was talking about he's going to suspend the Constitution and all of that, and I asked him about his time as mayor of Klein Karoo, Beaufort West, and he's telling me how brilliant it was. I said, well, where did the Constitution stop you from doing your job? And there's a mouthful of teeth when you ask those kind of questions. So I'm saying, and I wish that this would become part of the discourse, to say that the problem isn't the Constitution, the problem is management. I think the only person who actually said it,
I agree with you,
was Songezo Zibi. He's the only guy who actually said the problem's a management issue, which I agree, and a leadership issue. Because all of those mechanisms exist to do exactly what you could have done this 20 years ago, but they didn't elect us. But so, you know, to me, I see a lot of very emotional issues in South Africa. and we're having the wrong argument. People are saying we need to suspend property rights or stop the constitution, things like that. Whereas it all allows for this, and there's more than enough room to do these things. But if somebody doesn't want to do their job, as you say, get off your ass and do your job. It's not happening.
But that's why the ANC government that was filled with inaction and all of its problems has now exacerbated those voices who felt disenfranchised and felt things were moving slowly to now find a home, a more radical home, to start having this conversation. Because there would be no need.
Yeah.
Everybody understands that there would be no need for this. A lot of people in this country still support the ANC.
Yeah.
But they didn't vote for the ANC.
Yes. The thing that I feel, strongly about, and maybe we're talking about race, etc., is it kind of gets dressed up as a mistake of whites trying to hold on to property rights, whereas I don't think that is necessarily the case. Yes, you do have farms that aren't effectively used, and something should be done about that. But the point is that the biggest issue and the biggest road to prosperity in this country is going to be through growing generational wealth, using the land most efficiently, right, and cutting red tape. That, to me, is a simple discussion here.
So I'm not opposed to that, but I want to add to that and say that, yes, those seem simple in conversation, but people felt that they had to move away through their vote from the ANC because they felt that it doesn't make sense for them to do so anymore.
I agree.
So maybe what has happened is that we have created the conditions to have more forward-moving conversations around land and all of the things that are tied to it, around the financing, around state financing, etc. Maybe we're suddenly going to have those conversations because there isn't a broad church that basically suppresses dissenting voices or alternate voices when it comes to how we should do things. Because where we find ourselves now is, it's turbulent, yes, but I think a government of national unity will make sense. Mm-hmm. I might be different from a lot of people, but I think that there are certain portfolios that lend themselves to particular parties. Give the DA tourism. It makes sense. They run a hub, probably the number one tourism hub in South Africa. Give them tourism. Let them thrive. The EFF, give them the land policy. You guys have been saying you want 1, 2, 3, 4. Give them the land policy. Let you guys give out the land and do it properly within the frameworks that have been created. You say that there isn't management, etc. There isn't this, that. Push it. The developmental parts of our ministries, give them to people who understand how we can push these things forward. So we finally have an opportunity to have a different discussion in this country around the execution of policies that many have felt are sufficient to move us forward, but have never gotten the right management backing. So maybe it took the radicals to move out and have their own discussion for everyone to suddenly say, whoa, hold on. We need to have a proper discussion. Maybe that's what it needed. Backs against the wall, exactly. You're going to negotiate. So as much as it will be chaos, in Game of Thrones, chaos is a ladder. And if you put in the work, you can climb up.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it turns out that the only mistake you made at the polls was not voting for the Puffer Jacket Coalition.
Definitely. They should have voted for us.
Resolved South Africa's land issue in a matter of an hour. Zimasa, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mike.
We didn't really get stuck into what the government's going to look like, but we'll save that for when we know what the government looks like.
100%. In 2 weeks, we'll know.
And we will see this man again on many channels. You're definitely going to see him here on the State of the Nation again. To everybody that watched this far, you better subscribe and like and support Pace Car Rental.
Definitely.
I'm Mike Sham, State of the Nation. Thank you very much to Zimasa Vibaza for joining us. Mustafa, go and find him on social media. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again.
Cheers.